Good morning, everyone. I'm delighted to be here to welcome you to this webinar update on the changes to the way we will be inspecting FES providers from the 10th of November. My name is Denise Olander, and I am pleased to be joined today with colleagues who've been instrumental in the development of our new approach. Colleagues, would you like to introduce yourselves, please? I'm going to start with Andrea.
Good morning, everybody. My name's Andrea Dill-Russell. I'm Senior His Majesty's Inspector in the FES Policy Team.
Thank you. Paul?
Good morning, everyone. Paul Cocker, Assistant Regional Director for the North West.
Thank you. And Rebecca?
Hello, everybody. I'm Rebecca Perry, one of His Majesty's Inspectors and a Specialist Advisor in the FES Policy Team.
Thank you very much. And then before we begin, I just wanted to say thank you to those of you who've kindly sent us questions before the webinar. We have some time allocated at the end of the session to answer them. So in addition, please do use the question box on the top right-hand side to pose any questions throughout the session, and colleagues will do our very best to answer those questions. And then we'll ask Rebecca to do a summary at the end of some of the key questions that have come through, because what you won't be able to see is some of the questions posed by others and the answers that we've given. Thank you. So let's begin. This is an outline of the session that we planned for today. Last year's Big Listen heard from many thousands of parents and professionals whose feedback has helped us make changes to the way we work. This year we consulted on a new approach to to the way in which we inspect education providers from this autumn. We have responded to the Big Listen and the recent consultation by not only changing the way inspection looks, but importantly, how it feels. And we will be sharing with you the changes we will be making from the 10th of November and what they mean for further education and skills providers. We'll also share with you our plans for what we are calling our steady and assured start. We will share how we are planning on measuring the impact of the renewed framework. And of course, as I mentioned, we'll have the opportunity to answer your questions. So, what do we want to achieve? Every one of us has a desire to work for all learners and apprentices to receive a high quality of education and training, an education that enables everyone to achieve, belong, and thrive. And we will continue to put learners and apprentices first. We want great outcomes for all, including learners and apprentices who are disadvantaged, those with SEND or high needs, those who are known or previously known to social care, and those who may face other barriers to their learning and or their well-being, including those without level 2 in English and mathematics. If we get it right for the most vulnerable, we get it right for all. And for the first time, inclusion will be a focus on every inspection. We also need to be fair to providers. It's important for us to point out where providers don't meet the expected standards, and extremely important to celebrate exceptionality. On all inspections, we will celebrate strengths, validate leaders' priorities and the progress that they've made since the previous inspection, and highlight where improvement is still needed. We remain committed to improving how it feels to be inspected, while continuing to encourage and support providers to raise standards. We are committed to working with leaders to determine the areas of inspection focus, and we'll talk a little bit about those later, and agree the most appropriate activities tailored to each specific provider. So, the following slides set out our journey over the previous few years, leading to the largest ever consultation in Ofsted's history. So if we look at the journey so far, and we focus on the case for change, leaders of education know and understand the importance of accountability, given their daily responsibilities. But for many years, calls have been made to look again at the burdens created by this accountability, of which Ofsted is just one actor in a complex system. Following the Big Listen, we set out an ambition to reset relationships with the professionals we inspect, while retaining the confidence of the learners, parents and carers we work for. As I mentioned, in February 25, we conducted a 12-week consultation which set out a series of proposals for change, and those proposals were specific to further education and skills. We received more than 6,500 responses to the online consultation, both from parents and educational professionals. Feedback was also gathered through focus groups and roundtables, in-depth discussions with experts, visits to volunteer providers, and qualitative and quantitative research. And I'd just like to take a moment to thank all of the providers who volunteered to take part in our test visits and now our pilot inspections. Let's have a look at a summary of the key changes that we are making. But before we do that, I just wanted to remind everyone that our consultation proposals in February were not set in stone, and we have carefully listened to all of the feedback from the consultation, and we have tested and further refined our methodology. We believe our new approach represents the right balance between the interests of parents, learners, and employers, and the wishes of educational professionals. Our core purpose and driving mission is to keep apprentices and learners safe and improve their lives. So let's take a look at the key changes. Firstly, the new inspection report card is designed to highlight excellence and identify areas for improvement, driving high and rising standards. The report card will provide more nuance for parents and providers, combining at-a-glance grades with narrative summaries of strengths and areas for improvement. Following extensive feedback and user testing of February's proposed version, the report card has been redesigned to make it more accessible, particularly on mobile devices. The second change is a new 5-point grading scale to set high expectations while encouraging improvement where it's needed. In response to feedback from professionals and parents about the proposed terminology, the final set of grades have changed to urgent improvement, needs attention, expected standard, strong standard, and exceptional. And I'd just like to focus on expected standard. This is a high bar. Providers will need to demonstrate that they have met all of the relevant statutory duties and non-statutory and statutory guidance. In doing so, providers will demonstrate that they are providing a high quality standard of education for all learners and apprentices, irrespective of their starting points or individual needs. All of the expected standards in the toolkit must be met to be graded at the expected standard. If not, that evaluation area will likely to be graded as needs attention. And then exceptional, this has been introduced to identify the very best provision in the country. In a change from the initial proposals, providers will not be asked to submit case studies for approval. Instead, inspectors will evaluate exceptional practice by applying the toolkit, subject to the usual quality assurance and consistency checking. Our third key change is a renewed focus on inclusion, and this evaluation area has been introduced to help break down barriers to learning and well-being. Inspectors will evaluate whether education providers are providing high quality support for all, especially those from disadvantaged backgrounds, those who have SEND, and those who are known to children's social care. The fourth change is the new inspection toolkit for grading providers. And this shows providers and inspectors the evaluation areas that we will focus on and how we will assess and grade providers. There are a wider range of evaluation areas than in our current methodology, but following feedback, the number of core evaluations has been streamlined from a maximum of 20, where a provider has 4 provision types, to now a maximum of 16 evaluation areas. In response to feedback, the definition of grades have been tightened to more clearly differentiate between them, and the standards covered in the toolkits have also been slimmed down to provide greater clarity on the evidence inspectors will assess. The fifth change is the new inspection methodology, and this aims to reduce workload for the education workforce. The toolkit is designed to assess the professional standards and statutory and non-statutory requirements already placed on FES providers. And the new operating guide sets out the times that inspectors can arrive on site and the suggested latest times they should be departing. And this is to help to cap the length of inspection days for providers and their staff. We will evaluate providers' work to support and promote leader and staff well-being, and this will be considered as part of the leadership and governance evaluation area. Inspection findings will be grounded in a clear understanding of each provider's unique circumstances, and the new operating guide sets out how leaders and inspectors will reflect on a provider's context and priorities. We've also introduced a new online insights platform called Ofsted Explore an Area. This gives parents and employers key information about the education and care services in their local area. Another change is the new system for monitoring providers where improvement is needed. And this helps to reassure parents and carers. These new monitoring inspections will allow providers to improve their needs attention grades and have their improvements recognised. And Ofsted will publish more information on the new monitoring inspections next month. And finally, to drive consistent and fair inspections in FE and skills, our inspections will mostly be led by full-time inspectors. These experienced inspectors will oversee the inspection, building a professional relationship with leaders, including the nominee, to deliver a more collaborative experience. So these will be led by His Majesty's inspectors. In addition, Ofsted will introduce a programme of work to assess consistency in FES inspections, including having a senior inspector shadow a sample of live inspections to guide and advise the inspection team. Post-inspection, any initial differences between the senior inspector and the team will be analysed. So let's have a look at our renewed approach. We will put learners and apprentices first, breaking down barriers by raising standards, especially for the most disadvantaged and vulnerable. We will improve the look of and feel of inspection for education providers and professionals with a more collaborative approach. We will maintain a focus on having care and concern for the well-being and workload of providers, and we will take context into greater account on every inspection. We will make inspections consistent in approach and continue to improve our process for allowing inspections to be challenged. And we will provide constructive advice to improve based on conversations with leaders. And if you look at each of the toolkits that we have shared when we published on the 9th of September, you will see that each of them are different by design. If you look at the ITE and the FES toolkits, they are very different, and we've tailored our inspection approach to each remit and provision type within those toolkits. So we've included this slide because we thought it would be helpful to explain in one slide how we plan on inspecting and grading each of the providers. So if you look at the top of the slide, leadership and governance, inclusion, and safeguarding will be judged for all providers. And you can see that the 5 grades apply to leadership and governance and inclusion, and safeguarding will be judged as met and not met. And Andrea is going to talk a little bit about that later. For those providers who are currently in receipt of an inspection of their contribution to meeting skills needs, so colleges, sixth form colleges and specialist designated institutions, they too will be inspected against this evaluation area, but this evaluation area now has the same 5 grades as leadership and governance and inclusion. So these are our whole provider evaluation areas. And then depending on the provider and the number of provision types that that provider offers, each provision type will be judged against the curriculum, teaching and training evaluation area, achievement, and participation and development. And you will see each of them will be graded using one of the 5 new grades that we've introduced. So this is where hopefully this slide helps to understand where those 16 grades, up to 16 grades, will come from. So I'm now going to hand over to Andrea, who's going to talk about how we're going to strengthen our approach to inclusion.
Thank you, Denise. So regarding inclusion, we will put learners and apprentices first, breaking down barriers by raising standards, especially for the disadvantaged and vulnerable. This is why we're introducing a separate inclusion evaluation area. Inclusion will also be a key theme across other evaluation areas. Our inspections will look at how providers are addressing barriers to learning for all learners and apprentices. We will always start with those the government asks providers to focus on, whether through statutory obligations or non-statutory guidance. This is why we are particularly emphasising those from socio-economically disadvantaged backgrounds, those with SEND and those known or previously known to children's social care. We will also evaluate how well providers ensure that there is high quality support for all learners and apprentices who may face other barriers to their learning and or well-being. Working with the provider to understand their context, informed by their demographic information and professional dialogue. And as part of understanding the barriers most relevant to a provider, inspectors will make use of demographic data to understand a provider's cohort. But crucially, they will speak with leaders to understand the context in which the provider is working and the particular barriers that cohorts face. As inspectors form their evaluation of the inclusion evaluation area, they will consider the systems and processes that leaders put in place to identify the needs of learners and apprentices at their provision, and address and review the support they receive. In addition to that, each area of the toolkit will have a focus on those who face the greatest barriers to ensure that they work well for all learners and apprentices, be that teaching and curriculum, providers' practice around attendance and behaviour, or personal development and well-being. It's important to us to understand that when we consider inclusion in FES, we will be doing so through the provider level evaluation area and through the provision type evaluation areas. The whole provider evaluation area is about leaders' actions in identifying and assessing needs and in reducing barriers. The actions taken by staff to meet learners and apprentices' needs through the curriculum and their teaching practices sits in the provision type evaluation areas. In the information about inclusion in the toolkit, you will see the 3 main factors that we've identified that contribute most strongly to inclusion. These are prioritising the early and accurate identification and assessment of learners and apprentices' needs, reducing barriers to education, training and or well-being to support their development, and working closely and effectively with learners and apprentices, parents and carers, professionals and staff, and ensuring that learners and apprentices' views and aspirations are included in decision-making about their support. You will have seen that there are 4 key groups identified in the toolkit related to inclusion. These are disadvantaged learners and apprentices who face challenges that hinder their educational progress. And this refers to those learners and apprentices who've been eligible for free school meals in the past 6 years and those from low income families. The second is learners and apprentices with special educational needs and disabilities, and those in learning programmes that receive high needs funding. This includes learners and apprentices receiving additional support with their learning and those with an education, health and care plan. Third is learners and apprentices who are known to or have been known to social care, such as those who are under the age of 18 in care and care leavers, and also those known to youth justice services. And finally, learners and apprentices who face other barriers to their learning and or well-being, including those without level 2 English and or mathematics. So when we're thinking about inclusion, we will inspect inclusion using many of the approaches you'll be familiar with, such as speaking with leaders, using relevant data and talking to learners and apprentices. We will also be undertaking case sampling and learning walks, and we will explain more about those shortly. We will gather evidence that reflects on the systems and processes leaders put in place to inform the inclusion evaluation area. Evidence gathered on areas like curriculum and teaching will also consider how well these are designed inclusively to meet the needs of those who face barriers to their learning and well-being. We recognise that arrangements to support these learners' apprentices will vary based on their needs and the type of provider we inspect. Inspectors will want to meet the leader or leaders who have oversight of SEND, but we recognise that this may not be a specific role in all of our FES providers. So we're just going to start to have a little look at the toolkits now. Our toolkits show providers and inspectors the evaluation areas that we'll focus on, and within them the standards we will evaluate to inform grading. The inspection toolkit is based on statutory duties and non-statutory guidance, professional standards, research and inspection evidence. The toolkit is not a checklist, and I just want to reinforce that. It is a guide to conversations, reflect on evidence and make sure grades reflect the evidence gathered. It supports a shared understanding and discussion of the strengths of the provider's work, its context and areas for further exploration. Inspectors will apply the toolkit areas, themes and standards, tailoring evaluations to each provider's context. As we've said, nothing in the standards set out in the toolkits should add to a provider's workload, nor do we expect providers to have completed any formal self-evaluation. However, you may wish to use the toolkit to support continuing improvements, and we will expect leaders to share their strengths, successes and priorities with us. We've carefully reflected on evaluation areas in our consultation and how these should apply for different sectors. So a bit more on the toolkits. The toolkit is broken down into different evaluation areas. Each one starts with a covering page, then a summative statement of what the evaluation area covers to help leaders and inspectors to understand what the evaluation area is at a glance. Just a reminder that our grading standards are based on research, inspection evidence, statutory and non-statutory guidance set by the DfE. Following that, the toolkit sets out the most significant contributory factors that underpin our approaches to evidence gathering and grading. This is very much based on the research that underpinned the education inspection framework. As part of one of our key commitments, the FES toolkit has been designed to reflect all four of the different provision types, and Paul's going to take us through that in a little bit more detail for apprenticeships. You'll see a section of each evaluation area that identifies how inspectors will consider that area in different provision and provider types. Further to this, specific standards in the toolkit have been aligned to specific provision types. We'll share more detail about this later. Each evaluation area explains the evidence inspectors will gather and always starts with a theme about strategic leadership in that area and ends with a theme about inclusive practices. The gathering evidence sections of the toolkit break down each evaluation area into a set of themes, which each include a series of evidence gathering prompts. Under specific themes, there are a series of gathering prompts. You can see the themes inspectors will explore and the types of questions that help shape evidence gathering. Inspectors use the evidence gathering prompts to guide their activities, building a picture of what is typical for a provider before then applying the grading standards using the evidence they have gathered. This will inform the structure of their evidence gathering approach and recording. So as a recap, each of the evaluation areas will be graded against this scale: urgent improvement, needs attention, expected standard, strong standard and exceptional. For safeguarding, there is a binary met and not met grade. The evaluation areas follow with clear grading standards of the proposed grades we expect to see most frequently on inspection. For expected and strong standard, each grade has a set of standards that define the quality expected for each area. These are based where relevant and available on the statutory and non-statutory guidance and professional guidelines that are set by government. When grading, we will start with expected standard to identify whether all the standards have been met. All of the standards have to be met for the grade to be expected standard. If all of the expected standards are met, we can move to consider strong, where the same applies. All have to be met for that grade to be awarded. This is a key difference from the best fit model that inspectors have previously applied, and is to ensure that there is a complete transparency about the grading process. If all of the expected standards are not met, the indicators for needs attention are considered to determine the extent and urgency of the required improvements. We expect to see urgent improvements and exceptional less frequently. As with needs attention, there are indicators identified for urgent improvements, and exceptional is just that. In order to achieve that grade in evaluation area, all the secure and the strong standards have to be met, and the work of the provider is transformational. So let's just remind ourselves of some of the key aspects. We're moving towards a more supportive, empathetic approach to inspections, in which the starting point will be expected standard. We will further take each provider's context into account. Inspectors will tailor their approach to each FES provider's types. We will adopt a more collaborative approach. We have extensively tested our inspection methodology, revising our approach to make inspection feel a more collaborative process. We will be consistent in our approach to inspections and continue to improve our process for providers to feedback about their inspection experience. We'll provide a constructive advice to improve based on inspection evidence and conversations with leaders. We will do all of this through a values-driven approach to inspections that is professional, empathetic, respectful, and courteous. And the last slide for me before I hand over to Paul is to talk about the key changes in FES regarding notifications for full inspections. We've listened to the feedback from providers and taken into consideration the complexity of providers and provision types, as well as the planning required by small providers as part of our response to reduce the burden on providers and working collaboratively. So we've taken the decision to align the notification for all providers to being normally 5 to 6 working days. So that is an increase from the 2 days previously for full inspections. This will be different when we send out the operating guide about monitoring visits. So we're just talking about full inspections here. And this is to enable leaders and inspectors to plan for the complexity of different inspections. Thank you. I'm going to hand over to Paul.
Thank you, Andrea. So what do the changes mean for you as FE and skills providers who provide apprenticeships? We'd like to start by taking you through the planning stage of the inspection and what it might look like during the actual inspection. So, what will happen before the inspector arrives on site? As Andrew's already mentioned, the notification window has increased from 2 to normally being between 5 or 6 working days for all providers. In the notification call, we will ask provider leaders to identify a nominee and an optional shadow nominee. For those providers who we consider the skills evaluation area, there is no longer a need for the skills nominee, as we've mentioned before. And a number of planning calls will take place between notification and inspectors arriving on site. During these planning calls, the lead inspector will work with the nominee or nominees and leaders to identify any necessary reasonable adjustments. The lead inspector will work collaboratively with provider leaders and the nominee to plan a timetable for the inspection that will enable inspectors to gather the evidence they need to make grading decisions. This will be based on collaborative and professional discussion. The structure of the planning will vary according to the size and scale of the provider. For example, the planning for a large national independent learning provider with a range of teaching approaches will look and feel different to the plans for a smaller employer provider where apprentices are taught on site, or a higher education institution where apprentices attend their training in block weeks. Let's now explore the planning stage in a bit more detail. To plan the inspection effectively, leaders will work collaboratively with leaders to use the planning calls to develop an accurate understanding of the provider's context, including the demographics of the apprentices and their needs. This may take place in up to 3 parts: introduction and discussing practicalities, understanding the provider's context, and planning inspection activities. Lead inspectors will seek to understand the lens through which leaders have made their decisions and reflect on the impact of the provider's work, particularly for apprentices who are disadvantaged, those with SEND or high needs, those who are known or previously known to social care, and those who may face other barriers to their learning and or well-being, including those without Level 2 English and or mathematics. As a result of these discussions, the lead inspector will confirm the inspection focus areas and agree the steps needed to identify the learners and apprentices to include in the case sample. For example, lead inspectors will consider the provider's context when planning inspection activities. In a national ILP that teaches their apprentices online, the lead inspector and a few other inspectors may be based at the provider's head office, while other inspectors may work remotely around the country. Working with the provider, the lead inspector will choose the apprentices for inspectors to conduct case sampling. This will allow inspectors to gather evidence on the outcomes and experiences of disadvantaged apprentices, those with SEND and or receipt of high needs funding, those known or previously known to children's social care, and those who face other barriers to their learning and or well-being. If leaders have not identified any apprentices who fall into the groups listed above, they will reflect with you on why this may be the case, considering any contextual information that is shared with them. The lead inspector will aim to plan at least 3 learning walks. They're an opportunity to explore inclusion, curriculum teaching and training, and achievement and leadership themes jointly. We recognise that this may not be feasible in all providers due to their size and context, but the lead inspector will discuss this fully as part of the planning process. There is no set format for the learning walk. The time can be used to have focused discussions with leaders and inspectors based on one of the broad focus areas of that walk. It could be that for an online learning provider, we undertake virtual learning walks through with leaders. The learning walks are an opportunity for leaders to show where their impact is and the impact of that area. We now want to share a bit more detail about the structure of the inspection itself. The new methodology gives more flexibility to carry out inspection activities across all days of the inspection, as opposed to the structured format of deep dives. Day 1 will start with a short introductory meeting where the lead inspector will brief the whole team on the key information that leaders have shared with them through the planning process. The initial meeting is designed to build on conversations held during the planning stage and to ensure that the whole inspection team understand the context of the provider. Some team members might join the initial meeting remotely, depending on the geographical location of the activities they are scheduled to complete. Inspectors will start the inspection activities after the introductory meeting. Usually this will start with a provision type meeting for each one that is on offer at the provider. These meetings are based on professional discussion with relevant provider managers or representatives and will help inspectors understand more about the provision type in the context of each of the evaluation areas. After this meeting, inspectors will undertake a range of activities to explore an inspection focus area. This may include activities such as lesson and workplace visits, discussions with apprentices, employers, parents, teachers, trainers and assessors, and reviewing documents and apprentices' work, all of which will be familiar activities. Within the inspection focus areas, inspectors will explore the experiences of apprentices who have been selected for case sampling, allowing them to gather valuable evidence about inclusion. Further inspection focus areas will be considered as the inspection progresses. These may be in response to emerging themes and our ongoing discussions with leaders. These activities will continue over the duration of the inspection. Where applicable, the lead inspector will review the single central record as early as possible in the inspection. This is to assure leaders as early as possible about the quality of their safer recruitment procedures, in case they need time to address any minor administrative omissions. Other activities will include joint learning walks, which we have already talked about, and specific meetings with leaders and staff on identified evaluation areas. For example, if an employer provider, the lead inspector may meet the senior leadership team to discuss the oversight of the apprenticeship provision. There are some changes to the names and focus of the daily meetings that take place with inspectors and the nominee. Reflection meetings, previously known as the Keep in Touch meetings or KIP meetings, continue to be an opportunity for the inspection team and leaders to review the evidence and share feedback. This will allow the team to share their thinking in an open, professional, and transparent manner. This will also provide time for consideration of whether any inspection activity needs to be adapted in light of emerging evidence. These meetings will take place formally at the start and end of each inspection day, but there can be ongoing reflection meetings between the lead inspector and the nominee throughout the inspection. The inspection will conclude with a grader meeting with the nominee and a final feedback meeting involving other senior leaders and external bodies as appropriate. As mentioned earlier in the webinar, each evaluation area toolkit contains a section that identifies how inspectors will consider that area in different provision and provider types. Further to this, specific standards in the toolkit have been aligned to specific provision types. We wanted to share some of the key considerations that inspectors will make when evaluating providers who offer apprenticeships. When considering inclusion, inspectors will seek to understand the context of apprentices and how that impacts on leaders, approaches and arrangements to support them. It is clear in the toolkit that inspectors should take account of the differences in pastoral needs between different groups and ages of apprentices. For example, what is appropriate for a younger apprentice where this is the first job will be totally different to a mature apprentice studying a professional apprenticeship. It is clear within the leadership and governance evaluation area that inspectors will take account of the various governance and oversight structures that apprenticeship providers will have. We know that providers will establish different approaches to governance and/or oversight based on the specific context and on guidance for the provider type. For example, an employee provider may not have governors, but there is likely to be someone with overall responsibility for the apprenticeship provision. In a HEI, inspectors would not necessarily expect to meet the chair of the governance committee, as the oversight of the apprenticeship provision will likely sit with a subcommittee structure. Inspectors will also take account of the fact that providers' approaches to developing relationships and partnerships with external stakeholders will vary based on the curriculum offer and context. Over the next 3 slides, you can see, and forgive me if this writing is a little small, that for each provision type evaluation area, there are standards that relate to the specific provision type. So, here you can see, along with the standards that rightly apply to all provision types, a standard that relates directly to apprentices. In this instance, that the curriculum is ensuring that the principles and requirements of apprenticeships are met, and that staff and employers plan on and off the job training effectively. We have focused in our renewed inspection framework on considering the context of providers, which includes a careful focus on aspects which are of a particular importance within the different provision types that we inspect. So here in achievement, you can see the achievement for apprentices is woven through each of the standards. This highlights the broad focus that we have in achievement for both learners and apprentices, for whom there are many important ways in which we can gather evidence for achievement. And this is similar in participation and development. That said, our inspectors are trained to consider carefully context. For example, what might represent high expectations in terms of behaviours and attitudes for a group of young learners may be very different for a group of adult apprentices. In participation and development, we have made even clearer the range of factors that inspectors will consider within this evaluation area. This includes what wider development plans look like for apprentices, who often have busy family lives and demanding job roles. We understand that careers education and guidance will also differ depending on apprentices' context. This is also the case for how we consider age-appropriate guidance on tutorial topics, such as healthy relationships. When looking at attendance and behaviour, inspectors will take account of those apprentices who need to improve or develop their behaviour and attitudes, alongside acknowledging that many apprentices work in highly skilled and professional roles and do not always need ongoing development of these skills. It may be that in more of a focus of professional behaviours or skills that are needed for an apprentice to progress to a more senior role. I'll now pass over to Andrea.
Thanks, Paul. So we're just going to talk about after inspection. So we're bringing together the most popular preferences of parents, stakeholders and professionals by combining separate grades, rating scales and short summaries into the new report cards. The narrative will give a detailed picture of performance under the 5-point scale, offers clarity and simplicity. We will publish data alongside the inspection report to illustrate the provided context and the key performance data over time, which will have been used to inform evaluation grades. The data will differ for each remit, but will be displayed in a consistent design. The draft report card will usually be sent as similar timescales to now, within 18 working days, the provider to submit any factual comments or a complaint. And the final report card will usually be published to the provider within 30 working days of the inspection. Where a provider has an evaluation area of less than expected standard, they will be subject to monitoring visits. And as we've said, the operating guide for this will be out next month. So just a quick recap on changes. I've shared with you a change is the introduction of the 5-point grading scale, which means that providers will have a wide range of grades, with some evaluation areas may be it needs attention, while others will be at strong standard. Safeguarding will now be graded as met or not met, and the evaluation area for contributing to skills needs will now be graded across the 5-point grading scale. There's no longer a requirement for a skills nominee, but providers can have a shadow nominee. Inspectors have a much greater focus on understanding the context of the provider to inform inspection focus areas. You will hopefully appreciate that there is an increased focus on inclusion. We've talked about the importance of understanding the provider evaluation area. This is about leaders' actions in identifying and assessing needs and reducing barriers. The actions taken by staff to meet learners and apprentices' needs through the curriculum and their teaching practices sits in the provision type evaluation areas. We also talked about the 4 categories of learners and apprentices, but this is not an exhaustive list. And finally, hopefully the welcome change to notification windows from 2 days to 5 to 6 working days for all providers. Our response to the consultation has been published, and you'll find this on gov.uk. We'll be hosting a number of engagement events regionally as well as nationally, hosting webinars and attending sector events. All education inspectors will also complete comprehensive training to support the transitions through a new framework before being deployed on live inspection. For openness and transparency, full inspector training materials will continue to be published online via the Ofsted Academy once inspectors have completed the face-to-face training. In addition to this training package, Ofsted will undertake pilot visits to volunteer settings, giving inspectors vital experience of full end-to-end inspections before November. These pilot visits will be quality assured by Ofsted's National Director for Education and Principal Inspector. We will resume routine inspections under the revised framework in November, as discussed. And during this period, we will maintain any urgent inspection or regulatory activity in schools, early years and further education as required. And I'm now just going to pass back to Denise for the final section.
Thank you, Andrea. And we want to build in time for questions at the end. So this is just a quick overview of what we mean by the term steady and assured start. So you know that we are going to roll out our inspections from the 10th of November under the renewed inspection framework. And we have set out several measures to support that steady and assured start. So you will see enhanced quality assurance on our inspections, but there will be fewer inspections. And as I mentioned earlier, all inspections will be led by experienced HMI and senior HMI. And our part-time inspectors will be phased into our inspections following their training. In the autumn term, if you are chosen for an inspection, a random sample of providers will be invited to take part in exit interviews with the Chief Inspector or our National Director or one of our senior Ofsted officials. And that's to hear about your experience of the inspection and to reflect on the implementation of our reforms. And HMCI will also invite sector representatives to roundtable meetings to share their thoughts on the renewed framework as part of our commitment to transparency and listening to feedback. So during our steady and assured start, all requests for an inspection deferral will be reviewed by the Ofsted Deputy Chief Inspector, and this is to make sure that each case is treated fairly and with the utmost sensitivity and consideration. Our telephone helpline for leaders to raise queries and concerns will be open before, during and after the inspection, and we will not be inspecting the week of the 15th of December, which is the week before the Christmas break. So we're actually only going to be inspecting something like 5 weeks between the 10th of November and the 15th of December. And then just to share with you some ways in which Ofsted plans to measure the impact of the renewed framework on the sector. And this slide shows how we will assess our reforms, making sure that they're working by delivering a programme of evaluation to understand the implementation and impact of our reforms. And here on the slide, we'll give you a number of examples of how we plan on doing that. So at 10:49, I am going to move into the question section. And if colleagues can come on camera, please. It'd be really nice to see you as we pose and answer questions. Thank you. So we've had quite a lot of questions about inclusion, and particularly about how we will decide which students are going to be involved in that inclusion evaluation area. So Andrea, do you want to say a little something about that?
So obviously when we do the planning call with providers, we will talk about their learners and their context, and then identify that sort of the learners that they sort of consider in the category of inclusion, very much from the context of the provider. And then we will then sort of then identify individuals to look at through our sort of case sampling approach.
Thank you. And just on that, one of the questions that was sent in before the webinar was about our expectation on providers regarding qualifications and experience of staff leading on SEND, particularly if a provider doesn't have a significant amount of provision.
So there has been a sort of drive sort of in the sector around getting what you would classify as a qualified SENCO. We don't see that as a requirement and wouldn't necessarily expect to see that in particular for apprenticeship providers. What we will be interested to understand is what trainings take place to ensure that staff, trainers, teachers and leaders understand the needs of those learners and then can accommodate those needs through their curriculum and their support. It's very much about those professional discussions and conversations.
Brilliant, thank you. And Becky, could you just say a bit more about context? We've had quite a lot of questions about what do we mean by context, what will be considered?
Absolutely. When we talk about context, we mean what we want to do is understand you as a provider, who your learners are, the areas that you serve, the employers that you work with, the sectors that you're working with, so that we can really understand what it is that you do and that strategy behind your provision. It's about getting that understanding as the starting point so that we can then apply our inspection activities and our evaluations to your context. So it will be, as Andrea said on the planning call, we'll do a lot of exploring that with you as part of the planning process so that we understand your context fully and then take that into account.
Thank you. Paul, lots of questions about level 2 English and mathematics, and also the link to shouldn't this be for learners aged 16 to 19 only. Can you talk a little bit about that, please?
Yeah, obviously the requirement for English and mathematics for apprenticeships has recently changed, but if we have a look at the inclusion evaluation area, it does talk about us looking at those learners and to what extent those learners are supported. I think the key point there is it's not just about the qualifications, it's about the development of those skills so that those learners or apprentices can access the content of the apprenticeship. So that's what we'll be looking at as part of the renewed framework.
Thank you, Paul. And Becky, could you talk a bit about how the structure of the inspection's changing? There's been questions about if we're not doing deep dives, what are we doing? Talk a bit more about those inspection focus areas, please.
Yeah, lovely. That's a great question, and actually it's come up as well, hasn't it, on some of the other webinars. So yes, we're not going to be doing deep dives anymore, but you will recognise the activities that we're doing. We will still talk to learners, we'll talk to staff, we'll talk to leaders, we'll look at the work and articles that apprentices produce. We'll still review documentation. The difference is that we won't be doing it necessarily through just subject focused deep dives. So it may be that as we go through an inspection, we start looking at subjects to get under curriculum, but we might then have what we call an inspection focus area into particular aspects of provision, something that you've been working on to improve, something that you have improved, or it could be that there's something in the evidence that's indicating we're going to follow up on a particular theme. So it will, as I say, inspection's still inspection. There are only certain things that we can do. It's the way that we're putting those things together to get the evidence that we need that will feel different.
Thank you very much. And we've had some questions about timescales. So the new cycle of inspection timescale starts on the 10th of November and it's a 4-year cycle. We use information about your current grade, and we also conduct a whole range of risk assessment activities. So we use information about what we know about you to help to decide where you are in that 4-year cycle, but also your previous grade at inspection. So just to make that clear, so we've moved from 5 to 4 years. We've got question, Becky, about how educational developers support those teaching on apprenticeships through teaching observations.
Can you clarify? Sorry, Denise, can you read the question out, just because I'm not quite sure what the question's asking?
That is it. How can education developers support those teaching on apprenticeships through teaching observations?
I think it's. I'm going to try and understand the question. So apologies if I'm slightly missing what you were asking. So observations of teaching for yourselves, it's up to you if you do those, how you quality assure the teaching that's taking place, the experience of apprentices, what they're learning and how that takes place. If you choose to do that through observations of teaching and learning, then it's about the feedback that's given to those teachers, those trainers, how targeted development is for those, for any areas of development that are identified through those observations of teaching and learning. We are interested in how you understand the quality of the provision, the experiences that apprentices gain, and the actions that you take to make improvements where improvements are identified. We wouldn't dictate that must be done through observations. I want to make that very, very clear. But where you do that, as I say, it's all about that feedback loop, really, isn't it? And what comes out, the impact of those observations for those individual teachers. I hope that's some way towards answering the question.
Okay, thank you. We've had quite a lot of questions as well in relation to the operating guide, where we say we're going to be asked the provider during the planning call to tell us what they're really proud of, what's a strength in their provision, and whether they've got any priorities for improvement. And that will be used to inform the inspection focus areas that we agree with the nominee. The second part of that statement in the operating guide talks about we will ask providers where they sit on the 5-point scale, and the question was about, is that for each evaluation area? The answer to that is yes. We want to get a sense check from you about where you sit, because this inspection process is very different. It's a professional conversation where you tell us where you think you sit on that 5-point scale and why, and then we have a conversation with you about how that's going to inform the inspection focus areas. And then throughout the inspection, we'll talk to you about whether we're finding what you've told us, whether we found stronger provision, or whether we find something that you may not have mentioned or you didn't feel was such an area for improvement. So it's used really as the beginning of a professional dialogue between the lead inspector and the nominee. So I just wanted to raise that. Andrea, there's a question about the ESFA audit processes for apprenticeships, and will that be impacted by the new framework?
So I think the word audit quite often comes up in relation to inspection, and I think the key thing is to say is that inspectors are not auditors, and we are very separate from the DFE. So that's a DFE decision and is not linked to inspection, the operating guide, or the toolkits in any way. So just to sort of rest assured, really, those two things don't correlate.
Yeah, and we've had lots of questions about, what are people expected to prepare if you look at the operating guide and the inspection information document. So the inspection information document is written with providers in mind. The operating guide is written with lead inspectors in mind, but we're publishing them so we can be completely transparent about what we expect our inspectors to do. So please do have a look at those if you get time. And when the lead inspector announces your inspection, they will refer you to that document and they will talk you through that document so that you can see exactly what you'll be asked to engage with. Rebecca, a question about embedding and contextualizing English and maths skills, what we will be expected to look for, and also whether we expect evidence for the development of digital and AI related skills.
It's all about what's appropriate for the apprenticeship and what's appropriate for the individual apprentice. We are obviously aware, and there's been quite a few questions about the changing requirement for 19 plus and functional skills qualifications. We will want to explore how well apprentices are developing and improving their English and mathematics and where appropriate digital skills in relation to the sector that they're working in, the apprenticeship that they're on, their aspirations, their next steps, etc. We aren't going to dictate that they should or shouldn't be on qualifications, but it's again, that's not our decision as to whether they are required to do that. Our interest is in the development of those skills as appropriate to, as I say, their individual circumstances, the apprenticeship that they're on, the career paths that they're on. I hope that helps.
Thank you. So we're coming towards the end of the webinar. We've had a number of questions about employer providers, as well as ITPs, and how we are going to tailor our inspections much more towards those. And I'm hoping that you've heard through the explanations around context and how important that is, and also how we, if you look at the operating guide, we're now allocating much more time to the planning. There are 3 stages to the planning, whereas previously there was 1. So we're putting a lot more time into understanding who you are, what you are, how you do, where you do, so that we can really use that to inform the inspection activities that we plan with you as the nominee. So Rebecca, would you like to just summarize some of the key questions that have been asked today? Because we've had tens of questions and we tried to do our very best to answer as many as we possibly can in between presenting. So summary,
apologies.
Some of the key questions and the responses.
Yeah, lovely. We'll do. And apologies for those that we couldn't answer directly. But to be honest, you've covered an awful lot of the themes that came out from the questions, Denise. One of the others was around self-assessment and quality improvement plans and whether people are required to submit those to Ofsted, and also the time needed to align them to the toolkit away from the previous EIF. In response to that, just to say that if you are welcome to submit your self-assessment and any quality improvement plans to us, as you always have been, it's not a requirement. We don't require you to do so or to have one. We're interested in how you identify where there may be potentially areas for improvement and the actions that you take to secure improvements. We don't expect to suddenly see a raft of self-assessment reports that are aligned to the toolkit. You may choose to do that, and that is up to you. But as I said to one colleague on the call, in agreement to what they said to me, self-assessment is for you. It's not for Ofsted. We also had a few questions just to clarify about enhanced inspections, and just to clarify, they are for general further education colleges, sixth form colleges and designated institutions. So ITPs, employer providers, HEIs will not have a skills judgment. And finally, there was quite a few questions early on about whether or not the toolkit is a checklist or not. Well, obviously, we've said that it's not. In response to that, it is not a checklist in terms of how we gather evidence. So inspectors will undertake activities where they will gather evidence for a range of different parts of the evaluation areas. We're not going to inspect one bit at a time, and we don't expect you to provide evidence for each bit at a time. In that way, it is not a checklist. Of course, with the secure fit grading that we've described today, we will have to consider each of the standards when it comes to grading decisions, but we will not inspect it as a checklist. Those really were the other themes, Denise, because you've also been monitoring them and have picked up on many of them.
Great. Thank you very much. So we have run over slightly. Thank you for all of you that have joined us today. I hope you found this session helpful. And as we've mentioned, there will be many more of these sessions that take place with sector organisations and also in your region. So please do contact the senior HMI in your region, and we'll do our very best to attend as many of those sessions as possible. So I hope you found this helpful. Thank you, everyone.